Thank you and welcome back again to our second hour of the series. And this topic is going to be about family concerns. What I am going to be posing to our panelists is this. Many of our young Muslims are either first or second generation. Some of us, a few of us, might be immigrants still. But yet most of them are first or second generation Americans. And yet they're thus, of course, westernized. And they still have at the same time, they're very close ties to their parents and their culture and their traditions at home. That's when it comes time in seeking a partner, how involved should we allow our parents be in choosing our spouse? And this is, again, from a professional perspective and, of course, from a religious perspective. How much do we allow our parents to get involved in our decision-making in our spouse? And keep in mind that here you're speaking to an audience that are first, second generation Muslims, so they're very much westernized culture. But yet at home, we still have that, traditional cultural way of our parents' heritage. So if we could hear some information about that, thank you very much.
Let me begin with the...
Turn it on.
Let me begin with the religious perspective. See, my friends, in the East, there is no role for the couple when they want to get married. It is their parents' decision in some traditional societies, while in the West, there is no role for the parents. It's only solely the decision of the couples. And I think we have to seek a middle path. First, it is the responsibility of the couples themselves, but they have to involve their families. They have to involve them, because in Islam the family does not only consist of the husband and the wife, but the children and the parents and the in-laws too. You have to live with them. You cannot separate yourself from your in-laws, because you need your children to be raised not just by you, not just influenced by you. You need the grandpa, the grandma, the uncles, the aunts, all those to be also involved. But then it is your future, not your parents' future. So you have the final say, but with the blessing and the acceptance and the endorsement of your parents. So you have to work on this. Some people come to me and they say, I want to get married. My parents are boycotting my marriage. They don't want to give their blessing. I say you have to think about it. You have to do something to convince them, which is doable. Sometimes your parents' rejection is based on arrogance, is based on race, prejudice. So it takes time to convince them. Get the Imam involved, get the elders involved, get someone else to convince your parents. But don't get married without your parents' blessings. Neither get married because your mother wants you to marry your cousin, or your father, he loves for you to marry his nephew or whatever. Don't do that. Do not do that. Avoid that, because this is your future.
So again, it's a balancing act. It's trying to find the middle ground. So if you're here, especially the third or fourth generation, you know the culture here. And your family, of course, have the culture of the back home. So families have, traditional families are very enmeshed, they're very close. Whereas here, the focus is on individuation, on being separate. So how do we balance this? There's a wisdom from when we look in the Eastern society, and there's even a saying that goes, it takes a village to raise a child. And the reason is whenever you have a social support, that's a buffer. That's a buffer for you to be able to overcome stress in relationship. So the question becomes then, where do you put the boundary between family and your immediate family? Where is the boundary? At the core of it, you have to think this nuclear family as your nuclear family, so there needs to be this sense of we-ness, right? But then how do you also include your external family? Again, it goes back to the issue of how do you create that boundary between you and your in-laws, for example. Okay, and in order to do that, it's going to require again knowing yourself, but also your family origin and the kind of attachment and relationship that you have with your parents. If you are very involved, for example, if the man is very involved with his family, but the woman comes from a family that are very distant, now you're coming in together with different style of communication and so, different style of relating. So being able to know each other and being able to know the other person's family, earlier we were talking about being a detector. Being a detector is knowing your spouse, family origin, attachment, history. That will be able to help you to draw the boundary.
Thank you.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Good choice.
All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. All right.
So
So they say when you get married to 6 people, and guess. All right. So in-laws, right? So the in-law interference question came up, and actually that's one of the top reasons why people get divorced is in-law interference, unfortunately. But from what I've seen in terms of couples, everyone's, I'm assuming, the 21 to 35 age range in here. So it really depends on the comfort level of the person. And also the family culture also is involved. But also, I mean, I've seen different scenarios. So it's also what works best for the couple in that case. So family can be involved from day one, right? Or if it's like a friend setup, you meet it through the friend and then get the family involved, right? So there are different routes that people have gone through. However, family has always been in the picture, if that makes sense. Some way, somehow. Because, I mean, growing up here, unfortunately, like, we see, like one of the brothers mentioned, like media influence, right? So we have this kind of idea of how we should be meeting people in the first place, or like how families should be involved. And in the Western society, family's not really involved when you first meet people, right? In terms of like getting to know each other. But in the Eastern culture, as Dr. Said was mentioning, family has a huge role. So it also is dependent upon your culture and what you know is to be okay with your parents. That's huge. Because as the Sheikh was saying, I mean, your parents have to be on your side. If your parents are not on your side, it's going to be a huge battle going up. Very, very difficult. I mean, I also have seen cases where, let's say the brother or the sister didn't meet the criteria for the parents. That's when you can get like a sheikh involved. If like the brother or the sister like fits, like in terms of Muslim criteria, they're okay, and they just need an approval from someone else, like an objective approval, then you can get someone else involved as well. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Sayyida, you had mentioned something that I would like, I think a lot of sisters also ask this question often, is that, if they're looking at a potential guy for a possible partner in their life, and their father is adamant opposed against that relationship, to what, even though you've tried and in your mind, your heart, you're set on this guy, but it's still your father's insisting otherwise, and could be for reasons that he's not fitting the criteria that you wanted in for a spouse. So what is the religious aspect? What's her religious duty in that regard?
in this case, we have to examine and find out why the father is objecting to this relationship. If we discover and find out that this is based on a prejudice, because this guy is from a different village, different country, different race, he's a colored, he's white, and these are the reasons, or financial reasons, because he does not, he's not compatible with the father's financial status, or maybe he's not graduate of a good school. These reasons are unacceptable in Islam. Then in this case, the father, there is a religious term, they call it in jurisprudence, Islamic law. They call it adl. And adl means when the father deters his daughter from a lawful and legitimate marriage. In this case, he has no authority. And we don't need his blessing anymore. But if his concerns are legitimate, because there is something with this guy or with this lady, there is something principally wrong with them.
And we're talking here, you're using
Religion and akhlaq.
We're talking now here, you just mentioned him or her.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not necessarily the daughters, but it's also
Of
the
course,
sons,
of
the
course,
parents are
yeah,
opposing.
because even the son, he needs his father's blessing for his marriage.
Do you hear that voice?
Yeah. So if there is something fundamentally wrong with that person, with the candidate, then we know that the father or the mother's concern are legitimate. And in this case, they have, Islam does not say don't marry. He does not say do not marry, you cannot. But he says your marriage is going to be problematic. Be careful of that.
Thank you. Yes, Doctor. Yes.
Yeah. I said earlier, when you're a couple, in this case, when it requires family or like interfering mother-in-law.
Not a father-in-law. Always you blame the mother-in-law. Poor,
She said
poor
mother-in-law.
mother-in-laws.
Or sister-in-law.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Establishes the most important thing is to establishing a sense of we-ness or solidarity. So, for example, your wife, your mother is visiting, and your wife went out of her way to cook what will be to impress your mother, for example. She cooked everything. But then your mother, the other way around. So your mother-in-law and your parents are coming, and your wife wants to show your parents around, so she made a reservation in a cafeteria. In a restaurant, and she was looking forward to that. Now the mother comes in and she wants to outdo or outstage the wife, so she prepares her son's most favorable dishes. What do you do? Who do you side? That is where the we-ness comes in, because if you do not show that your wife that you support her, you're there for her, you're not understand her, then she's going to feel what? Neglected, and you're not on her side. You can let your mother down respectfully, but at the end of the day, that solidarity between a husband and wife is so important. The we-ness is so important that you have to hold on to it.
Thank you. Maryam, do you want to have any feedback, any comment about?
I think I.
Okay. Thank you very much on that. One of the sisters, and she'll remain anonymous about this, but she said, the in-laws ruin everything. That's according to what she said. How much do we allow our in-laws, or even our own parents, to get involved in the family, the dynamic of the marriage, the partnership? Where is the boundaries? Where are the lines to be
I
drawn?
think what the sister mentioned is an overstatement, because there are some in-laws that they play a positive role in their children's marriage. They are peacemakers when there is misunderstanding between the husband and the wife. Their interference is necessary, and it is very mature and unbiased and principled. So you cannot, blanket all, the in-laws and say out of my marriage. You can't do that.
But let's say they sense that we're going to have meddling in-laws, let's say.
If they sense, then there are measures to be taken. I go back to the question that the brother asked earlier. I believe your shelter and your home has to be independent from your in-laws. Don't marry while you are living with your parents or she's living with her parents. Stay away from that. Even if you have a one-bedroom apartment, being independent is better than living in a mansion, huge mansion with your in-laws. So this is one. The second, let them understand.
How come you should live independently?
living independently, it helps you to grow faster. It helps both to be financially responsible, financially responsible for their living, and also they learn things quickly. While if they live with their in-laws, they're going to be dependent on them, not just financially, but even socially. Even raising their kids, they're going to throw them on their parents, and then they go out. So it gives more independence and more self-respect for the person, for the couple to live independently from their parents.
May I add?
Please.
You said why independent?
Yeah.
Okay. We have to cut.
This is also kind of a background.
Yes.
Where my family is both international, one from Mexico, one from Korea. Both traditions, married couples live with their grandparents and so forth, all in the same household.
Okay. To answer the first question is when do you draw the boundary? When it comes to the decision making, it should be the husband and wife. The family, the extended family is there as the support system, that's the buffer. Okay? Now, as a couple, you have your own identity. At one point, you have to have your own way. And how do you individuate? Meaning, how do you become your own person and your own couple? At one point, you have to cut that umbilical cord. Because the common saying is that we are the reflection of our parents.
Off.
It's off.
No, please, sorry.
When you become a reflection on, if you believe this, that you are the reflection of your parents, then you're living your parents' dreams and not your own. Right? You are aspiring your parents' dream. If your parents says we want you to be a doctor, but you want to be a chef, okay? If you do not realize your own dream, and if you go by what your parents want, what's going to happen is there's going to be resentment. Maybe the resentment you do not know, it's not coming forth, but there's going to be a resentment. And that resentment is going to create distance rather than closeness. Whenever you see your parents, for example, or whenever they mention your children raising the children, is going to create that anxiety, that discomfort.
Where is the line between resentment and compromise? Where we say, I'll give up being a chef, but because I want to please my parents, which is a fundamental issue.
Good question. Resentment has a painful feeling or a pain or a negative feeling associated with it. It's an unresolved issue. Compromise, to reach the compromise, you have to have an unresolved issue about that. You cannot compromise while you're still having this painful or negative thoughts and feelings towards that subject. If that makes sense.
I think it's more of being content with the compromise. Would you not say, Doctor?
Yes, in order to have that compromise and to be content, you have to resolve that issue that you have. But unless you resolve that feeling, it could be guilt, it could be anger, it could be, sadness. Whatever the negative feeling that's there, unless it's explored, both of you explore and look at it and be able to be okay with that feeling, then it's very difficult to get a compromise. Then it's not going to be a compromise.
Of course, we need to hear your opinion.
Oh, okay.
Please.
Sure.
Because you said that a lot of your problems that come into the office are related to the in-laws.
I just want to mention first though that when you guys get married, you're gonna create your own family culture, right? So you get to bring in what you want from how you grew up, like the good things about the way your parents raised you, and the negative things you don't need to bring them in your new family, which is an awesome thing because you guys are creating this new family culture, if that makes sense. For example, even parenting, like you get to implement what you want that actually worked and was positive that you took from your parents, right? And you don't have to implement the negative things that may have happened to you while growing up. So that's a cool thing, and you guys get to create this cool family culture. So in terms of the in-law interference, I just want to stress the respect factor in terms of like the in-laws, because a lot of the problems I think arise because the respect factor is not there. let's say the meddling happened, you know, and it's either the wife or the husband kind of just does not want to be a part of the other spouse's family, or for whatever reason, because it can be a huge issue. Like, it could be a serious meddling issue that may have impacted the marriage, right, which can potentially lead to a divorce. So.
Question?
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, in our faith, we say heaven is under the feet of, you know, your mother. You know,
Good mothers, good mothers.
Good mother. So, like, the thing, I'm 36, but from the day I left the home, probably I get 1 or 2 phone calls asking about the details of what I've done during the day, and they're like very, very, very minute details that don't have any significance. And I've had significant relationships that have basically fallen apart because of that. And I've tried, you know, like changing phone numbers, moving out of state. I've lived in New York and lived in LA. I swear to God. But it's just, you know, once your parents know where your limits are, I think they can take advantage. There's really nothing you can do. I don't know what to say. So.
I think it goes back to the boundary that you set with your parents, even if you are moving hundreds of miles away. You know, it's the boundaries that you have with the parents in the first place. Like, you guys have your daily check-ins. If you have the daily check-ins, is your potential spouse okay with that? Are Sundays family day for you? Right? Is that the day you guys meet at one person's house? Is she gonna be cool with that?
I just think that I think as long as so much importance to the role of the mother, that you really have no choice. But I'd like to know the shades.
Yeah. I think it is us, the children, who determine the type of relationship we have with our parents. If we give in to their demands all the time, then even if you are not 36, 76, still she would call you every single day and she wants to know the details of your life. But if you can tell them, send a positive message that I'm a responsible person. You know, sometimes, let me ask you, why a father wants to know where his son is or where his daughter is at this moment? Why? Parents are busy in this life. They are very busy, too busy. But they want to ask for the safety and security of their children. So if the children can prove to their parents that I'm safe, I have proven to you for the last 10 years that I'm safe, I don't go to bad places, then parents are not going to have this sense of phobia and fear about their children's condition. So it is us who can determine and tell them through our own behavior, not just saying, not just to give them verbal assurances, practical assurances that so far nothing wrong has happened, so you don't have to check on me 24 hours a day. Do you want to say something?
Most of the time when a couple comes to my office and the issue of family interference comes in, the question I ask is, when your mother asked you to do A, B, C, D, what is the reason you said yes? How did that make you feel? Was it out of respect because that is what children have to do? Or is it to avoid conflict? Or is it because you have, other issues that you haven't resolved with your mother? So all those questions needs to be asked as to why you're saying yes or you're saying no. The yes and no answer is just the superficial. There's always underlying issue beneath that. Unless we detect that, then the yes or no are not going to be, answering the yes or no are not going to be sufficient.
Okay, sisters?
I have a question.
I forgot that you have.
Nowadays, people are more open to speaking to therapists or counseling and all that. And I guess more in the past, or even to this day, people go more to family. So how do you draw the balance of the best and using that support system for family versus a professional, and help break that stigma of what to go for and to who?
Let me answer that by asking you a question. What's the difference between talking to a friend and talking to a therapist? What's the main difference?
The bias and
Okay, so the objectivity. Okay, the objectivity, right?
and probably the methodology as well in terms of experience.
Yeah, for therapy to work, two things needs to happen. There needs to be objectivity and there needs to be a relationship. It's the relationship between the patient and the therapist that's going to work. But the therapist is in a better position to be objective, number one, okay? And the therapist is also in a better position to shine a light on what's going on. When you're in the midst of it, you won't be able to see your own issue. Okay, but when the therapist who is objective and does not have this fear, if I tell her this, she's not going to longer be my friend. Okay, if she is able to or he is able to shine the light on you, you already have the skills. You already have, the knowledge. But sometimes when you're immersed in it, you do not see. So all we do is us as a therapist is just showing you and shining the light and guiding you. And so that you will be able to know your own strength and you'll be able to know your own skills and be help you to develop more of those skills.
May I add to that, Doctor? You're not saying, though, that the parents you're sort of, I'm sensing, not undermining their ability to know their child best.
No, absolutely not. No.
Because I think the parents have tremendous ability to discern and know their child best. I know from a professional perspective, absolutely, to be objective. But I think parents, and I speak as myself as being a parent and many amongst my peers that are parents, our generation is much different than our parents' generation. We tend to understand our children, I think, a lot better than our parents understood us. And I think that we also can be not completely objective, I can't say, but we do have, I think, a great impact on trying to get our child to see certain things that they may not see because we really know them.
We know them and we're emotionally bonded to them. So when a question, especially that is very emotionally provoking or evoking comes, it's very difficult. Our sense is to go and defend and rescue them rather than taking a distance and looking at it and being able to help them learn how to problem solve. Most of the time that is the pit that parents fall in, is that through being protective and wanting to naturally comes to protect, we do not allow them or take the distance for them to look into the problem and help them build those skills to be able to problem solve. So overprotection oftentimes hinders them.
Well put, yes, thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
It's a statement and you can comment on it or agree or disagree. But from people that I know who've been married and have been divorced and have issues with their in-laws, I think it's really important that when we're discussing the topic of in-laws, we're not just talking about them like they're this huge, omniscient being that's going to be there no matter what, and there's nothing we can do to avoid them. I think it's really important that when you start a relationship, you both discuss how much do we want our parents to be involved, because I often find, specifically from the perspective of the female, the male will let his parents be more involved and end up causing tension between the mother and the wife because the mother is, being more involved than she should be. That's not always the case, but from my experience, that's what I've seen. So if the couple themselves are both firm in saying, okay, we're going to keep our problems between ourselves, because even though our parents have the best intentions for us, they might over-defend their child and end up causing more friction between the spouses, because it's like when you talk to your friend about someone who did something to hurt you, and instead of looking at the bigger picture and trying to maybe make you explain why something happened, they just start bad-mouthing that person or trying to make you hate them more, but it's out of good intention to make you feel better. I feel like sometimes parents might fall towards that without meaning to. So I think it's really important that we recognize that we as people who are getting married have a lot of power in our hands, and it's a matter of what you make it to be. Like, your parents are important and you have to respect them and, give them their dues, but it all comes down to what you do, and a lot of it is
Let me say something, Sister Ahlam, on keeping the problems among ourselves and not sharing them with the parents is good, but not always good, to a certain extent. If you live in an abusive relationship with an abusive partner, and then you keep, silent about it, you don't share it to anyone, yeah, that's not good. So at the end, you have to share it with someone before you explode.
In terms of like, you don't need to share every small little
Absolutely, absolutely. I like that person who came to me one day and knew his mother is somehow she's not a very good mother. She's not acting responsible. Okay? Troublemaker. He knows his mother. But then he loves his mother and he wants to respect her. So he said to his wife to be, right from the beginning, he said, listen, I respect my mother at all costs. But then I am going to keep her, away from marriage, but not to let her know about that. So we might go to her house once in a while, we receive her, but I want you to know that I am fully aware of my mother and what she's doing. And that is not going to have a bad effect on our marriage. This is something good we have to really share sometimes. While you are good to your parents, but your parents are not good people. You have to be good to them. I am a son. I have to be good to my mother even if my mother is evil, but not my wife. Okay? So in this case, we can play a major role in reconciling this relationship between our spouses on the one hand and with our parents and in-laws on the other hand.
That's my point. I wanted to, yes.
To say here that for Sarah, I like what we're discussing because in our religion, I mean, we kind of like we put parents on pedestal, and I know we should always respect our parents, but it's good to acknowledge that sometimes they could make mistakes, our parents, and I know we have to be good sons or daughter, but then also sometimes if you know your parents are not being just or not fair, what Dr. Sarah mentioned is like, what do? You accept and live in resentment to be a good son or a good daughter? I mean, for example,
In relationship to your marital life, or just being a son or a daughter?
No, I mean, let's say yes, they interfere in your marriage, or but they're not being right, they're not being just, but then you have to put up with it because they are your parents, and it leaves you end up living with a resentment. If you know they're not right, but you have to follow what they did.
Yes, and when there is any negative feelings or when there is what we strive for in a marriage and a relationship is to be able to be emotionally bonded, right? When there is a negative feeling such as resentment or anger, that is an obstacle that prevents you from being emotionally bonded, right? So keeping and having that resentment fester is gonna not only be problematic to the couple, but also to the children, to the family as a whole, if it's not resolved.
If I may change a little bit of the topic and come to talking about marrying somebody who is not of your ethnicity, or somebody of your nationality, or even the school of thought that you are. I mean, in Islam we have different branches, and the major two branches between Shia and Sunni. So what is the take on that from both how you guys see your professional field of couples coming in and from the religious aspect? If you could address that issue, please.
There is a magic ingredients in the marriage called commonality and togetherness, and Dr. Said, she calls it we-ness. And this is a very, very important ingredient right from the beginning. We have to work on commonalities to get closer to each other. in all departments, in all aspects of our marital life. One of them is religion, one of them is race. Race plays a major role in bringing people together. This is something you cannot resist. You like your race, you like your color. Sometimes you dislike other people's race or language or culture or color. Islam says if you dislike, you may dislike inside, but you may not present that or exhibit that outside. Okay? This is what Islam teaches us. Islam does not say fool yourself, and lie and cheat and be dishonest and say, yes, I like the white all the time, while inside you don't. Islam says you may not like them inside, the white or the black, but do not exhibit that. Okay? Keep it under control. So religion, madhab, school of thought, race, they all play a major role in bringing people together. Sometimes we have people who are not, they are supernatural people. Okay? They can ascend above these differences, above language or color or religion or race. Marriage may be with an outsider, it works for them, but it may not work for others. So it depends on you at the end of the day. Do you have a greater sense of tolerance? Can you accept another color, another language, another type of food, another religion? If you can put up with that, then go ahead with it. If not, you have to examine yourself. If not, then stick to your own field, your own environment.
Okay, remember the quote I mentioned earlier, marriages are successful to the degree that the problem you choose are ones you can cope with. So if the problem is solvable, then you're okay. But if the problem gets you to a gridlock and you won't be able to do that, then you have to think about that before going into that, number one. And number two, another important issue is common interests might keep you together. Okay? But that in itself is not as important as the way that you interact with each other. You might have commonality, but the way you interact with each other is not honoring or respecting each other's feelings and thoughts. The common interest compared to this is nothing. So it's how you relate to each other, even when you have a common interest. That's more important sometimes than the common interest itself or the conflict.
All right, so number one, you gotta check in with yourself. Are you okay with marrying outside your culture? It should be an easy yes or no. You guys could probably answer that right now while we're sitting here, right? But then the other thing that comes into play is family. So I think it's a really good idea to have an open conversation with your parents and also siblings, because you may be kind of leading the way for the other siblings, right? In case parents are maybe on one side or the other, right? So, so you know what expectations parents have, right? And let's say they don't match yours, that's where you start the conversation, kind of just understand their point of view, and then bring in your point of view. Because what if, I've seen this happen so many times. It's like a great brother and sister, and they're from different, ethnic backgrounds, but it's just the parents, they don't want the other to marry, because of the ethnic background. And so it's good to know before you get involved with someone. Because let's say you get too involved in terms of getting to know each other, and you're at that point where you want to go and ask for the hand. And the sister's like, I'm sorry, like my parents, they're not going to accept you. So you're in it so far that this should have been something that you guys should discuss from the get-go. So that's what I see. I see that happen a lot. So if you know family expectations, if you have a conversation with them, you just know, like, would they be okay with it or not? Would you be okay with it or not? If the answer is yes or no, then you can go, accordingly to the next step. And also, it's also good to ask the questions from the beginning in terms of the different cultures, because you mentioned the brother right there, I forgot your name, but in terms of, asking the right questions, you can ask how the person's culture can impact your relationship, right? So that's a good question to ask when you guys are getting to know each other.
let me add something to what Sister Leila mentioned. I think we cannot give an immediate answer, yes or no. I accept this race, this culture, this religion, this madhab, and I put it on a piece of paper. Answers that are given on a piece of paper are different than answers that are given in life. I know a friend who married to a different race. Okay? I don't want to specify the race. And she was so proud of that different race. And she used to promote it. And she used to brag about it and tell her friends, see, people thought this is a problem. See, in a practice, this is not a problem. After 12 years, she got divorced. And then she was telling me that was the wrong race. I disagree with marrying from outside your race. See? Because once you get involved, then you will know whether this is good or not. You can't give a simple yes or no answer. This is why I think sorry, Maryam, I called you Layla? Sorry about that.
It's okay. You make mistakes like that all the time.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. Just to generate some laughter. Yeah. So, regarding, I used to be very easygoing on inter-religious marriages. I said, this is good, let's get to know each other. But then in my office approved that this is something wrong. My desk, the divorce petitions on my desk, especially when we have sectarianism on rise and people are ignorant, they don't have that level of maturity or tolerance, then of course sectarianism and the madhab and the school of thought, it is going to get in their way. So now I'm not encouraging that, unless you are really, really ready for that. So we learn things from life, you know. This is not a simple yes or no answer. We learn things by practicing them.
Can I just?
Please.
When I meant yes or no, I meant would you guys be open to it? Like, would you guys be okay with even considering the person from opposite, like a different ethnic background? I didn't mean like automatic, but are you guys even open to it? If not, that's fine, as long as you know. Yeah.
By the way, Sister Maryam, I called you Layla by mistake, while I should have called you Maryam, and you called me Sheikh by mistake. You should call me Said.
When you're saying the filters or the categories of which you're trying to select, do you guys think online dating is a good avenue to try?
Yeah.
We're gonna get to the method of dating in our next hour. Well, I promise we're gonna come to the process and ways of getting to know somebody, whether online dating or knocking on, the door or whatever, or here in the masjid. So we're gonna get to that method. Any other questions regarding this topic here? And we'll go on. Yes.
Can I just?
I guess along the lines of family circumstances, family financials, I heard there's a hadith that people of a certain class or certain financial status should marry someone in a likewise similar stature. Is that hold true most of the time? When is it prevalent and is it not?
What do they say?
Yes,
The birds
yes.
of the same feather
Yeah.
flock together?
At a first glance, Islam says compatibility. And then someone asked the Prophet, what do you mean by compatibility? He said, Al-mu'minu kuf'ul mu'min. A believer is a counterpart and equal to another believer. A believer male is a counterpart and equal to a female believer. But yet we have many differences. At that time the Prophet was in one society, in a small city called Medina, surrounded by 90% of the people were from the same race, same language, same color. But then now we live in a global village, okay? We are close physically to each other, but yet we are far away from each other in terms of cultures and customs and traditions and ideas. So one of them is the financial status, because Islam says if you want to marry someone who is wealthy, she comes from a wealthy family, you have to provide her with the same standards that her parents provided her. So are you able to do that? If you are not able, then don't bring her down, because this is a recipe for divorce. So this is why the Prophet says, yes, this hadith is correct, because if that person is not ready to compromise and she wants to have the same living standards, then obviously you cannot provide her with that.
What if it's vice versa? What if the man will be bringing a woman up, significantly in financial status? What are the
You mean he marries someone he's wealthy,
Yeah.
and in this case it works, because the breadwinner and the responsible for sustenance is the husband. So it is his own money, so he can bring her up. While in the first example, because he's the breadwinner and he's responsible for spending, he cannot live up to her expectations. So in the second scenario, it works. Yes, I agree with that. But that is in a society where there is some perfection.
Can you translate?
The Quran says, if you have fear of getting married because of poverty, then don't fear the poverty. Once you get married, God is going to enrich you from His bounties. This is for someone who's looking for a job, and his mother says to him, listen, you have to wait until you graduate, until you get a job, until you do savings for 5 years, until you go to Hajj 7 times, then you get married. That does not work. God says, if you are not lazy, if you are looking for a job, go and get married. We will make it easy for you. This is an encouragement to establish a family. It's not related to what you raised. This is in relation to if you are hesitant, you still don't have an apartment, you don't own a house, then you are worried about that. Islam says live in a small apartment, then we will enrich you. That has nothing to do with what you mentioned.
I will add one more thing, if I may.
Please.
A question. You said, what if the husband, the guy has the money and he's bringing it up? Okay, it will work as long as he does not use that to put her down. If he uses that as a control issue, as put down and not respect, then it's not going to work. And to the question that you asked, let me turn it around and ask you this. If there is a difference of race or ethnicity, and you're not marrying because of that, then what do you do? The question was, would you marry if there's a difference? My question to you guys is, if you have resistance to marrying somebody outside your ethnicity or a race, why is that an issue? Why do you resist it? Based on what do you resist that?
That's a question we have to ask ourselves deep down.
Yeah, deep down. And remember, I start with saying most of the time we have these unresolved issues. So if, for example, I grew up in Africa and my mom, we went to Saudi Arabia, and my mom was a housekeeper and she was treated really badly, and my childhood memory is of my mom being disrespected, okay? Then I'm gonna be, as an adult, I'm gonna resist being close to anybody who resembles Arab, because my memory is these people did this to my mom. Unless I resolve that issue, I won't be able to be open.
Absolutely.
Let's hear a little bit from the audience about what's your take about marrying somebody that's outside of your culture, ethnicity, nationality, even your school of thought. I mean, what's your point of view on that? Do you guys see that as an issue, or you really don't see it as like a really top issue for you guys, that it's either it'll make or break the relationship?
To go back to what Said said, it really
Can you raise your voice?
sorry, it really depends on the person. I've seen situations where interracial or intersecular marriages work out beautifully, and I've seen situations where it just went all over the place. So it really depends on how people approach it. Again, I think it's really important that these are things you need to be discussing if you are open to an interracial marriage. And funny, because it looks like it's going to be something that's more predominant now because we are in America.
Brother?
I think if somebody like a young adult, a male adult, has a weak iman, he should marry like somebody from the same race and like the iman, that his iman gets better and better and be stronger. Yeah.
Good idea.
Sister?
I just wanted to, what Dr. Sara mentioned about Saudi Arabia, I have a Filipino friend who literally, her mother was working as a housekeeper in Saudi Arabia, and she ended up hating all Arab race because of it. That's one thing. The other thing, from personal experience, I think it's better, I agree with saying, it's not, it doesn't just depend on knowing oneself, if you're open to the idea of marrying from a different race or different sect. I think I think sometimes it's more important to know the other person. Some people, they might enter into the marriage for whatever reason, and then you discover they're completely close to the idea of, into marriage.
Thank you. Sure.
I think, well, everything that was mentioned is much all very true in application as well. But I think it's I've seen a lot of interracial marriages, and we ourselves we have three different cultures, I guess. But in most cases, I personally would not recommend it to most people. I really think, like Said was saying, it depends on the person. Not everyone can do it. Marriage itself is not an easy thing to figure out, especially in the beginning. And the more things that you add that are different, the more complications you're adding to yourself, the more challenges that you're adding to yourself. So you really have to be someone who's who's very flexible. You have to be willing to change a lot. You have to be able to handle, two different families, two different cultures. And sometimes even the family culture is different. So you have two different family cultures and you have two different actual cultures, and that really complicates it. And from my experience, the ones that have been extremely successful have been two polar opposites, where ones that there's one person in the couple who's willing to marry into the culture of the other person. And I've seen that happen a lot with my revert friends, where they come from a culture that's not really so dominant, and they marry into a very dominant culture that's, say, Indian or Pakistani or Arab, and they basically marry into it. They start taking a lot of its habits, a lot of its values, and that makes their life a lot easier. And then it doesn't create any kind of conflict. It reduces the conflict. But when someone is strongly holding their culture and both parties are doing it, eventually they're going to end up clashing, like Imam was saying. So the other side that actually wins is when both people are not cultural at all. And it's funny that we don't realize how cultural we are until, as they was saying, until we're placed in a situation where there is that. Because whether we like it or not, a lot of the habits and everything that we do, we've just taken it from our parents. And we do so many things like our parents do, even though we may criticize them at a young age and whatnot. But over time, you'll realize that we are a reflection of them in so many ways in our behavior. And they are a part of their culture, so your culture is reflecting your behavior. You're just not aware of it at a younger age. So,
Thank you. That's very good. I'm going to wind down. I have a lot of questions here. I promise I'm going to get to each and every one of them. So we're going to take a minute break, and then we're going to come back to the manners of dating and how to get to know the other person, and how to talk about all those little things. So take a 2-minute break, and let's come back.
Okay.